Hey all, welcome back to the channel. It's Friday and that means it is countdown day, and we're going to be doing something a little bit different today. We're going to do the top 10 and the bottom 10 of the most obscure Transformers characters. I know it's a little bit different. Stick with me, we're going to have fun with this one as we dive into the latest GotBot Counts Down. Hey all, welcome back to the channel. I'm your host, your most humble of hosts, Dennis Moulton, aka GotBot. As always, man, please like, comment, share. Of course, subscribe while you're at it. Light 'em up, baby. And hit that notification bell, please. It helps me out a ton. It lets you know when content of all sorts goes up here on the channel. Check out Machinery of Man, The Everything Factor, Transformers Collectors NL, The Autobot Family, Transformers vs. G.I. Joe vs. DC Universe vs. Marvel, and all of my social media links. They're all down in the description below. If you're in a position to help the channel, you can use the donate link. You can check us out on Patreon. You can see what we offer to you through Teespring, or of course, you can hit the join button right here on YouTube and become a channel member. And I said that this is going to be a little bit different, and indeed it is going to be a little bit different. This is going to be the top 10 and the bottom 10. So what do I mean by that? Normally, what happens is we put the question out on Mondays, and fans from all across social media will vote over the span of about 48 hours until midnight on Wednesday. We amass the votes, and then we bring the top 10 to you. However, the irony has not been lost to me, and was pointed out that, in fact, because these are obscure characters, there are probably many that wouldn't get any votes. Are the ones that get the lowest amount of votes going to be the most obscure? And I thought about it, and I said, you know, we're going to do our honorable mentions as we always do. We're going to do the top 10 as voted on by the fans, but I'm also going to do a bottom 10 of characters that didn't even get a vote, that did not get any vote whatsoever. These are ones that I found that I sort of amassed. This is a very visual countdown, so there are times that I'm going to kind of incorporate a picture here or there because you really need to see the character, because a lot of these you're probably not going to know. Some you certainly will, and some I have. Some have never even been cast in plastic. By the way, as the world continues to open up more and more, I myself am finally starting to get back to work. As such, our usual routine where these results go up on Fridays could slightly get changed going forward. It might become something like a Saturday, for example. So I'm just going to say, kind of bear with me a little bit through the growing pains as we head into the autumn of 2020. Now, that being said, the honorable mentions. I'll say this, the voting was super duper close. So many votes, so many characters, and there were a lot who got, for example, like 1 or 2 votes. Everyone from McAdam to Waspinator to Saltman Z to Alana to, I don't know who else got, Sandstorm, Impactor got a vote. All of these got like 1 vote. There was a lot, but everybody that's in the honorable mentions, and we actually have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 honorable mentions instead of our usual 5, because in the honorable mentions, all of these got the exact same number of votes, and all of them were 1 below actually making it onto the list. So for the honorable mentions, we have none other than Moonracer, one of the female Autobot Resistance members, as well as Rack and Ruin, the 2-headed Autobot that many have kind of come to know and love as one of the Wreckers. But there's still a lot of people that when they find out about him for the first time are really sort of shocked, and they're like, the dude has 2 heads and 4 legs? He's so crazy. Death's Head, who has actually been featured prominently in Universal Collision. Pipes, Skylinks, that one surprised me. Majin Zarek, Hubcap, who I think got the votes he did because he's getting a Selects release. Steve, the Viacon Steve, and I don't even know if I'm saying this right, Emirates Zeron, who has never been cast in plastic. I don't even think we know what his alt mode is. But none of those actually made the list. None of those were the top 10 most obscure characters as voted on by you guys. So who did make the list? Well, let's kick things off with number 10 first. And number 10 is a guy who's always nervous and has a bit of a smoking problem. That being Exhaust, who does some dirty jobs, no doubt about it. Originally, really based on an offering from, I think it was Diaclone, if I'm not mistaken. We know that this mold would eventually become Wheeljack, but this version of it ended up becoming known as Exhaust. It's sort of retcon G1 a bit later on, but he has sort of developed a bit of a cult following, especially with his recent masterpiece and now this release. But before those came out, he existed and people knew of him, but he was not nearly as widespread and well known as he is now, even if he is still obscure. For that reason, he takes the number 10 slot. Number 9 takes us definitely to the obscure with Flame, I assume G1 Flame, who is a disgraced Autobot scientist. So arrogant and so kind of focused on the idea that people need to think that he's right, that other bots need to think that he's right and that he's brilliant. And he is brilliant, but unfortunately he does it with absolute disregard for consequences or for dangers. And because of the fallout of consequences and dangers, he has become somewhat disgraced. Turning into a flame tank, he does still bear a striking resemblance to the color motif of Hot Rod or Rodimus Prime. But that single-minded focus on having to be right, that narcissism, is the thing that kind of leads him astray. A character that is very engaging but not well known, and for that reason he takes the number 9 slot. Number 8 takes us to the pages of IDW. I'd never heard of this character before. It is the Insecticon Bob, who is very docile and apparently serves as Sunstreaker's pet, cat, dog, rabbit. He has a pet Insecticon. Simple as that. Not a character I knew because I'm not an IDW guy, but a lot of people pointed it out and pointed out how quirky and weird it was that A, he's docile, B, that an Insecticon would really be okay being a pet to an Autobot, and C, that he had a name like Bob. Just so mundane and typical, just so usual, and for that reason he takes the number 8 slot. Now for number 7, most fans will know Rumble and they'll know Frenzy, but not as many know this guy. This is Enemy. Actually, this is my custom painted Enemy. And not as many people know Enemy, probably because he's not talked about a whole lot. He is so unlikable, so belligerent, that he goes out of his way to not cooperate with others. Even his fellow Decepticons are kind of loath to have to work with this guy. He's that unlikable. Nevertheless, he kind of has a brilliant color scheme, and he's even now had a couple of offerings in recent years. Much like Exhaust, he's sort of seen more highlights given to him in a bit of a renaissance. He definitely had a masterpiece offering, and because I knew of the character, I was able to repurpose a Frenzy into the guy, and I kind of am glad that I'm able to add him, because how often do you hear anybody talk about Enemy? For that reason, he takes the number 7 slot. And number 6 is more a legend in his own mind than anything else. He is a petty little tyrant, but cruel at the same time. He believes his power is much more than it actually is. I'm talking about Straxas, Lord Straxas of Polyhex. Again, if you know the comics, you will know Straxas more, but outside of that, he really hasn't had much in the way of fiction. He certainly never appeared in any of the programs. He is somebody who is, again, an example of an engaging character that really hasn't probably been given his due attention in fiction that he's really deserved and owed. And he's certainly not seen as the threat that he could certainly live to be. And for that reason, he takes the number 6 slot. Now, this is normally where I tout being at the halfway mark, but considering we're going to be doing a bottom 10, we're not really at the halfway mark here. However, it's kind of fitting that at this juncture, at number 5, we have a character who really only exists because of some confusion about animation, and one might even argue a little bit of an animation error. Who am I talking about? This guy. It's Redwing, and I'm not gonna lie. Until this guy was released, I had no idea who Redwing was or that he existed. He's apparently a bit of a daredevil. He doesn't have much in the way of fiction, but he looks so darn good. And honestly, based on the coloration of the original animation, this is pretty accurate. It's actually quite accurate. I totally dig the guy. There's not a lot to say other than his red, black, and white motif look fantastic. And how more obscure can you really get than existing because of some confusion over animation and coloring? For that reason, he takes the number 5 slot. And yeah, number 4 isn't Grapple. No, this guy isn't Constructicon green or yellow or whatever you want to call it. But it is my stand-in for Holler, who is at number 4. And really, the only claim to fame Holler has is Cliffjumper saying, "Pull him up, Holler." And besides that, anything about him is kind of retcon that he was, a Constructicon, and that he had that color, and that he didn't stay with the other Constructicons because he didn't agree with what they were doing, and blah, blah, blah. He exists because of pieced together little bits of fiction over time based on one line from the animation and one characterization where we had a crane truck that was this color. A lot of people say that it was incorrectly Grapple who was there, and that he was called Holler, and some have said it's a separate character, and some have said no, that's Holler. Originally Holler was this color. Why he's been turned green, who knows. With so much ambiguity about his fiction and his existence, he was bound to appear on this list, and that's why he takes the number 4 slot. Number 3 has one claim to fame: his special arm, and the fact that he turns into a wheel. I'm talking about Scrounge, who is actually a a spaceship in the Generations line. It's based on the excellent Cosmos mold, and if you turn it up, I suppose it could be a tire, a wheel. It's Scrounge. He didn't exist for a long time, but he was brave for the time that he did, and he only existed in the comics. If you didn't read the comics, it's pretty unlikely you would know this guy. When he came out as part of the Combiner Wars set for Computron, most people said, "I don't care about him, I've never heard of him, I don't know who he is." And it was only then that it was really pointed out his existence in the comics. It was only then that I found out about it. And by then the franchise had already existed about 30 or so years. So, if that's not a measure of obscurity, I really don't know what is, and that's why he takes the number 3 slot. Now, number 2 is a little bit complicated, to be honest with you, because the understanding of this character is a little bit complicated. It is, by rights, Bumble Jumper, though most people just shorten it to Bumper. Some people have said that Bumper and Bumble Jumper are two completely different things. At the end of the day, my reference that I go by is when I look it up and what is it that I'm led to on the official TF Wiki, basically. And when you look for Bumble Jumper, it takes you to Bumper. So we're going to say that number 2 is this guy. Evidently, the yellow cliff jumper is Bumper. He's a young bot, not very experienced, but outside of that, there's not a whole lot about the character or his fiction. And because he's kind of still cloaked in so much mystery, other than being a yellow clone, so to speak, of Cliff Jumper, he doesn't have a whole lot more to his personality. For that reason, he takes the number 2 slot, and that only leaves us with 1. And number 1 takes us to the original bounty hunter, an Autobot nonetheless. Who am I talking about? I'm talking about DeCon. Although some people say, hey, originally his name was DeCon. Actually, it wasn't. They wanted to use DeCon, but because it was a military acronym and there were heightened Cold War tensions in the 80s, they weren't allowed to use DEFCON, so they came up with the kind of sound-alike word of DevCon. So he was DevCon from the start, even though conceptually they wanted to use DEFCON. There's a lot that's unclear about this character. We know that he's an Autobot. We know that he is embittered after the war for whatever sort of reasons that might be. Apparently he was like an Imperial Marshal or something, and that kind of embittered him, where he was once like a jovial, happy-go-lucky type of bot. It isn't clear where he gets paid from or like who he takes his Decepticon bounties to. It's been suggested that he might be loosely associated with the Wreckers. It's hard to say because there's a few mysteries to the character and a few tangents that his characterization could go off in because his fiction has been so limited. Just enough to kind of wet the whistle and make you think about how the character might exist, where he might live, and what he might do. And for that reason, he takes the number 1 slot. Now, that being said, this is normally where I say, hey, we've gone from 10 to 1 once again, and we have. And I am kind of surprised that the voting went as it did, because the top two had the exact same number of votes. They were tied. You could have done them in either order, if I'm being perfectly transparent with you guys. But we're not actually done yet. No. Now, kind of visually, I'm going to very quickly show you the bottom 10 that we have to add to this list this time around. And so, being a little bit different, this is the bottom 10, and we kick things off with Tigertrack. Now, Tigertrack, of course, is a G1 lad, and a lot of people know him now because of his masterpiece offering and because of his more recently announced Selects offering. And honestly, there's not a lot of fiction for him. He's noted as being very visually acute. Apparently, his optics work really well, I guess, and he's supposed to be very loyal. But even in his original G1 offering, he was a mail away exclusive, I think, in Japan, because his original characterization has little fiction. Because his original offering was really so limited, he got to take the number 10 slot. And number 9, for an obscure character that got no votes, takes us to Beast Wars and the Maximal known as Eggbird. And there's also a Predacon known as Dark Eggbird, and then in KISS players, this mold was used again for Sparkbot, and it was even used for another Japanese character, Zangetsu. Maybe Sparkbot and Zangetsu are the same character, I'm not really sure. It goes back to Microchange MC16 Hawk, which was released a long time ago. In fact, I reviewed it here on the channel. Little did anybody know that it was actually a Beast Wars character who is, spoiler, a sleeper agent of Unicron. Because so few know him, let alone the fact that it goes back to Microchange, and let alone the fact that it was part of Beast Wars, and really the only mention was in Ask Vector Prime, this guy got to take the number 9 slot. And next up we have one of the original 13, that being Onyx Prime. Really the Prime over the Beasts, basically. And it's so strange. His fiction is so weird. He actually ended up becoming a part of the Allspark pretty early. And in terms of plastic representations, he's only had one, and that was a Prime Master. And you could only get that if you got Titan class Predaking. So kind of having a representation of him is extremely limited. His fiction is somewhat obscure and limited, and he has kind of become the stuff of legend rather than kind of getting a lot of modern day love. And for that reason, and because he got no votes, he takes the number 8 slot. And next up we have the Decepticons' Ultimate Emperor. That was his title. This is Dark Nova, and he's some sort of a weird, strange, alien entity thing that took control of the Decepticons in the Return of Convoy story pages. And his kind of ultimate plan, long story short, was to revive Megatron by getting Galvatron's body. And that's how we ended up with Super Megatron, and then with Ultra Megatron, and eventually he even merged with Megatron to give us the mammoth, the massive Star Giant, in whom Star Convoy had to enter and kind of destroy that from the inside out. At the end of the day, the only thing that survived was Megatron's disembodied head floating somewhere through space. But because he was leader of the Decepticons, in a portion of the continuity that very few even know, Dark Nova has to take the number 7 slot. And at number 6, we have one of the Primes. That's right, I said it, one of the Primes. This is Modus Prime, who really looks like the love child between Bumblebee and Optimus, if I'm being perfectly honest. Not a lot of fiction. Modus Prime apparently was like the leader of the Minicons, and after the big battle with Unicron was supposed to kind of clean up the planet, but very quickly got destroyed by a series of explosions that in essence were meant to further the devious plans of Broadside for a Minicon-ruled society on Cybertron. I don't know, it's short and it's weird, but nevertheless, I myself had never even heard of Modus Prime until I started doing research for this particular list. And for that reason, gotta take the number 6 slot. And at the, again, halfway mark, 3/4 mark for this particular video, we have not Ratchet. That's right, this is not Ratchet. I use this as a stand-in for a different character, a character that doesn't even have a character model, a character that is actually related to Modus Prime, that being Remedy. And in that continuity, Remedy is a small Medibot who tried to save Modus Prime and did not succeed. However, that's not the only time that we've had Remedy. Remedy is also part of the Aligned continuity, and within the pages of the Covenant of Primus, we learned that, I believe that Remedy was like the chief surgeon on Cybertron, and that Ratchet studied under Remedy to become the great doctor that we do know all and love. So it only seemed fitting that when I had a version of Ratchet in my collection already, but I wanted this mold, that it kind of stood that it would make sense to have this be Remedy. And for that reason, he takes the number 5 slot. And at number 4, we have one of the Insecticon clones. This is Zaptrap, which is really just a clone of Shrapnel. And these are generally a mindless horde of clones that are pretty much controlled by Shrapnel. We've never seen this coloration in the original animation, though we did see clones of the Insecticons. This coloration was used like in Transtech. It basically, I think, harkens back to the original Diaclone colors. The clones of Bombshell are Salvo. Salvo did get a vote, and that's why Salvo's not on this list. But because Zaptrap didn't, Zaptrap does make this list at the number 4 slot. Number 3 takes us to another Decepticon clone, that being the unfortunately named Shothole, Shothole. And these are the clones of Kickback, extremely low intelligence. They can swarm and kind of help convert Energon. They have never appeared in any fiction at all in this color in any way, shape, or form. Again, my understanding is that these were like a collector, maybe e-hobby sort of exclusive-y thing, and I think the coloration again might be based on either Diaclone, or I've also heard that it could be kind of based on Shattered Glass Kickback. It's a lot here that is kind of left up in the air as to exactly what constitutes this guy. And because there's so much ambiguity around the character and very little fiction and even very little agreement where the coloration comes from, he got to take the number 3 slot. And at number 2, we have the esteemed High Circuit Master, Boltax, who basically made a store of all the Transformers knowledge called the Underbase. He kind of done this before the Great War, so he's kind of become the stuff of legend. He did have some roles in fiction. The only plastic representation that we have had attributed to him is actually not even named Boltax. It is Cybax that came with the Computron gift set. And even there, it's a bit of a tenuous linkage, where more often than not, he's even been referred to as Scrounge's special arm, rather than the High Circuit Master himself. Nevertheless, he has sort of been retconned to be a version of Boltax. If you don't know who Boltax is, what can I say? Probably go back and look at early Marvel G1, or take a look at Regeneration 1, because that's really where his bit of story is told. Not that there's a lot of it. And for that reason, he takes the number 2 slot, and that brings us to the number 1 most obscure Transformers character. And number 1 is the 6-armed freak known as Octos. And Octos was part of the triumvirate that seized control of the Decepticons after Straxas' second death. And it was this group, this council, that really kind of popularized the gladiatorial Decepticon fights, which of course gave rise to Megatron. So he's actually somewhat important, I suppose. That being said, the argument could be made that the other members of this triumvirate with him are also pretty, well, not well known. Let's put it that way. Like Lagonis, I think, is one. Caesar is another, and Octos, of course, is the top one. We never saw a alt mode for Octos. We just knew that he had 6 arms, and he only lasted for so long. But we found out after the fact that his alt mode is even one of the most outlandish that Transformers has ever had, because it's actually a crossover alt mode. Someone who was part of this triumvirate that brought the gladiatorial arena to the forefront is actually a crossover character. His alt mode is supposed to be that of a Dalek from Doctor Who. Go figure. Because of a weird alt mode, because of an alt mode we never did see, because of his strange robot mode, his important role yet being little known, and because he even flanks himself on a council with little known characters, he gotta take the #1 spot for most obscure Transformers character with 0 votes. So there you go. Now we've gone from 10 to 1, and I guess 1 to 10, so to speak. Based on the votes, #1 was DECon. But based on getting absolutely no votes, #1 is Octos. And I don't know how anything could be any more outlandish than Octos. His characterization is sort of important as part of the triumvirate that took over after the second death of Straxas, that really led to Decepticon decadence, where there was a big focus on the gladiatorial pits, which of course gave rise to Megatron himself. So it's sort of an important role, an important place. His robot mode is outlandish with 6 arms, kind of totally different. He had no alt mode until it was retconned a lot later that he's actually supposed to be a Dalek from Doctor Who. Crazy. But there's nothing here that's not outlandish about this character, and it's one that not many people know. And even when they do, they very often say his name incorrectly. I don't know if there's any way that anybody could be any more obscure, though I'm sure that there are still lots of characters who are obscure that did not appear on this list, and that probably are still hidden away. After all, we all know that one of the fun things to do when you're part of a fandom is to kind of delve into those corners and those dark spaces to see what sort of trinkets of knowledge about characters and story we can pull out. It's always fun. I'd love to hear who you would have considered putting on the list, or who you did vote for. I appreciate you guys coming by, giving me some of your extremely valuable time. I do know how important it is to you. If you're in a position to help the channel to grow, there's a donate link down in the description. You can check us out on Patreon. You can see what we offer to you through Teespring, or of course, you can hit the join button right here on YouTube and become a channel member. Subscribe while you're at it. Stick around, have some fun with us. Don't forget that somehow, some way, each and every single solitary day, man, you do make a difference. And I look forward, baby, to the next time that you and I get together to have another visit in the live streams at the stop motion premieres, or the old-fashioned way right here inside the videos.